the autumn of 1994, the engine of my battered Ford Escort coughed to a stop, leaving a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the car's windows like a living thing. Rain pattered softly on the windshield, a delicate rhythm that did little to ease the weight of the moment. I sat frozen, hands gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles pale against the cracked leather, staring at the cottage ahead. Its stone walls, streaked with moss and weathered by centuries, sagged under the uneven slate roof, which dipped in the center as if burdened by time. The windows, clouded with grime, stared back like cataract eyes, giving the place an air of abandonment that clawed at my resolve. At 32, I was Ethan Marshall, a former London journalist, my spirit eroded by years of chasing deadlines and dodging disillusionment. My wife, Elise, and I had fled the city's clamor for this remote village in northern England, seeking refuge in a cottage we hoped would be our sanctuary. But as I gazed at its forlorn facade, framed by the drizzle and the looming forest across the road, a faint unease coiled in my chest, a whisper of something older than the stones, something that had waited for us long before we arrived. Elise leaned forward beside me, her auburn hair catching the dim light filtering through the clouds, her green eyes alight with an optimism that had sustained us through the 6-hour drive from London. "It's perfect," she said, her voice bright, almost defiant against the gloom, as if she could will the cottage into being the haven we'd imagined. "Picture it, Ethan. Cleaned up, repainted ours." I glanced at her, then back at the cottage, my lips twitching in a reluctant smile, her enthusiasm a lifeline against my growing disquiet. "Perfect might be generous," I murmured, though her determination softened the edges of my doubt. She turned to me, her gaze fierce with resolve. "It has character, potential. You'll see." I nodded, unwilling to dim her light, and opened the car door. The damp air hit me instantly, sharp with the earthy scent of wet leaves, rain-soaked soil, and a faint, primal musk I couldn't place. My boots crunched on the gravel driveway as I stepped out, stretching to ease the stiffness in my shoulders, the long drive a dull ache in my bones. Elise was already out, circling to the trunk, her energy undeterred by the drizzle or the cottage's desolate appearance. The village we'd passed through had been unervingly quiet, its cobblestone streets and thatched roofs frozen in a timeless tableau. A man in a flat cap had nodded once, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim, before trudging onward, hands buried in his pockets as if guarding a secret. A woman outside the bakery, her apron dusted with flour, had offered a murmured welcome without meeting our gaze, her voice carrying a reserve that wasn't hostility but wasn't warmth either. It was as if the village held its breath, watching us with a collective wariness, an unspoken agreement to keep us at arm's length. Now, standing before the cottage, that silence returned, heavier, as though the landscape itself was complicit in a secret it refused to share. The forest across the road loomed, its trees packed tightly, their trunks dark and slick with rain, their branches weaving a canopy that swallowed the light, leaving the undergrowth in perpetual twilight. Its presence felt invasive, as if it pressed against the cottage, claiming dominion over the land. Elise handed me a cardboard box, her voice cutting through my reverie. "Come on, let's see what we're working with." I followed her up the uneven stone path, the box heavy with books and kitchenware, the cottage's silhouette growing larger with each step. The front door, its paint peeling in long, curling strips, creaked as Elise pushed it open, the sound echoing like a warning in the still air. Inside, the air was cool and thick with a musty scent, decades of dust, damp wood, and something faintly sour, like forgotten decay. The floorboards groaned under our weight, protesting our intrusion as we stepped into the kitchen. Elise set her box on the counter, a sturdy slab of oak scarred by years of use, and turned in a slow circle, her eyes tracing the room's contours. "It's not so bad," she said, her tone resolute, as if daring the cottage to contradict her. "A deep clean, some repairs. It'll feel like home in no time." I placed my box beside hers, my gaze wandering. The kitchen was small, dominated by a single window above the sink that overlooked the forest. The glass was streaked with grime, diffusing the weak daylight into a sickly glow. The cabinets, old but solid, peeled with faded green paint, their handles tarnished. A wooden table sat in the center, its surface etched with knife marks and stains, a silent witness to lives long gone. "We'll scrub everything," Elise continued, her voice a beacon of purpose. "Repaint the cabinets white, maybe, or something bolder like mustard yellow. What do you think?" I nodded absently, my attention snagged by the window. "Whatever you want." The forest beyond seemed to pulse, its trees leaning inward, their branches like skeletal fingers stretching toward the road. The shadows at their base were darker than they should have been, even in the rain, as if the light itself feared to tread there. "Elise," I said, my voice quieter, "did you notice the forest when we drove in?" She followed my gaze, her expression softening. "Of course. It's beautiful, isn't it? So wild, untouched. I can't wait to explore it." Her enthusiasm was genuine, but it jarred against the unease tightening my chest. I didn't respond immediately, my eyes locked on the trees. They seemed to watch, their stillness unnatural, as if they held a collective breath. "It feels close," I said finally, the words heavy, almost confessional. "Like it's watching us." Elise laughed, the sound bright but sharp in the dim kitchen, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You're just tired, Ethan. Maybe a little spooked by the move. It's a forest. Trees don't watch people." I turned away, shaking my head, her logic a flimsy shield against the instinct screaming in my gut. "Yeah, you're probably right." We returned to the car, unloading boxes as the rain intensified, soaking our clothes and plastering Elise's hair to her face. She laughed, undaunted, but I couldn't shake the sense that something lingered just beyond the tree line, its presence a weight on the edge of my perception. The village's reserve, the forest stillness. It was as if we'd stepped into a world poised on the brink of revelation, waiting for us to make the first misstep. The nights were the worst. In London, sleep had been a battle against the city's cacophony. Traffic, sirens, the hum of urban life. Here, the silence was its own assault, a quiet so profound it pressed against my eardrums, urging me to strain for any sound to break it. No wind whispered through the trees, no leaves rustled, no nightbirds called, no crickets chirped. It was a silence that felt deliberate, as if the world outside the cottage had agreed to hold still, watching, waiting. A week had passed since our arrival, and during the day, I kept busy, my hands a bulwark against the forest's looming shadow. The cottage demanded constant attention. The sagging roof needed new slate tiles, the garden fence's rotting posts required replacement, and loose stones in the perimeter wall begged for mortar. I hammered, sawed, and lifted, the rhythm of work anchoring me, keeping my mind from wandering too far into the darkness across the road. Elise thrived in the daylight, her energy a counterpoint to the village's isolation. She cleared weeds from the garden, her hands caked with soil as she planted rows of carrots, beets, and herbs, her face glowing with purpose. When not outside, she was in the kitchen, kneading dough or baking bread, the warm scent of yeast and flour filling the cottage, a fragile illusion of home. She seemed to draw strength from the act of creation, her optimism unshaken by the villagers' curt nods or the forest's oppressive presence. But at night, the cottage transformed. The warmth of Elisa's bread faded, and the silence grew heavier, seeping through the walls like damp. I woke one night with a start, my breath ragged, my skin slick with sweat. The room was dark, the window's faint outline barely visible in the crescent moon's glow. The sheets were tangled around my legs, as if I'd been running in my sleep. "Elise," I whispered, my voice hoarse, raw with the dream's residue. She stirred, her auburn hair spilling across the pillow, her hand finding my arm. "Ethan," her voice was soft, thick with sleep, her touch grounding. "What's wrong?" I swallowed, the dream's images vivid, clawing at my mind. "I had a dream." She propped herself on one elbow, concern etching her features in the dim light. "What kind?" I hesitated, the memory too raw, too real. "I was in the forest, running. Something was chasing me, but I couldn't see it. The ground, it felt alive, moving under my feet, pulsing, trying to trip me. The air smelled of decay, and the shadows, they reached for me like hands. Her hands squeezed my arm, her warmth a tether to reality. It's just stress, Ethan. The move, the work on the cottage, it's a lot. Your mind's playing tricks. I wanted to believe her, to let her words smooth the jagged edges of my fear, but the dream had been visceral. The damp, earthy stench, the shadow's hungry reach, the heavy tread of something just out of sight. She brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, her fingers gentle. "You're okay. It was just a dream." I nodded, unconvinced, my voice hollow. "Yeah, just a dream." She settled back, her hand lingering, her breathing evening out. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling's wooden beams, the silence pressing in, a presence as tangible as the darkness. The next day, I threw myself into work with desperate intensity. The garden fence, neglected for decades, was my focus. I spent the morning yanking out rotted posts, the damp earth clinging to them, releasing a sour, organic scent that mingled with the rain's musk. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds, its warmth a rare reprieve from the week's drizzle, casting long shadows across the garden. I wiped sweat from my forehead, reaching for another post, when something caught my eye. Hanging from a low branch near the forest's edge was a small charm. Twigs bound with coarse string, a dried flower, its petals brittle and gray, tucked at its center. It swayed gently, though the air was still, as if moved by an unseen hand. I straightened, hands gripping the post, a shiver tracing my spine. The charm was simple, likely a villager's trinket, perhaps a child's craft left from a game, but its presence felt deliberate, as if placed for me to find. I stared, my hands trembling, the charm's crude design an anchor for the unease I'd carried since arriving. I shook my head, dismissing it as nothing, a harmless decoration, but its image lingered, a silent question that haunted me as I returned to work, the forest's shadow lengthening across the road. That night, sleep was a distant hope. I lay beside Elise, her breathing soft and steady, while I twisted in the sheets, the ceiling's beams barely visible in the crescent moon's glow. Restlessness drove me from bed, the need for air overwhelming. I grabbed a sweater, its wool rough against my skin, and slipped into the hallway, the air cooler, scented with faint wood smoke from the dying fire. The front door's hinges groaned as I stepped onto the porch, the sound swallowed by the night stillness. The air was sharp, biting against my face, the crescent moon hanging low, casting faint shadows across the gravel driveway. The forest loomed across the road, its treetops silvered by moonlight, its base swallowed in impenetrable shadow. I took a deep breath, the cold stinging my lungs, and exhaled, my breath a ghostly plume. The stillness was heavier here, oppressive, as if the forest held dominion over the night, its silence a command to be obeyed. My gaze drifted to the tree line, drawn to the darkness like a moth to flame. Then I saw it, a shadow that didn't belong, darker than the rest, just beyond the forest's edge. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a figure barely distinguishable from the surrounding black. Its form was vague, shifting, as if not entirely solid, yet its presence was undeniable, heavy and watchful, a weight that pressed against my chest. I froze, my breath shallow, my feet rooted to the porch's weathered boards. I wanted to look away, to retreat inside, but my eyes were locked on the figure, its edges blurring into the shadows as if woven from them. Time stretched, the world unnaturally still, the figure motionless, its intent palpable. Slowly, it began to dissolve, the darkness swallowing it until the tree line was empty again, as if it had never been. I stood, trembling, my mind racing. A trick of the light, a shadow, nothing more. I forced myself inside, the door's cold knob biting my palm, the cottage's warmth doing little to chase the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I returned to bed, slipping beside Elise, her breathing a fragile anchor, but sleep refused to come, the shadow's presence lingering like a stain. The nights grew longer, sleep coming in shallow, restless fits. I'd lie awake, Elise sleeping soundly beside me, while I wrestled with a weight I couldn't name, a dread that coiled tighter with each passing day. A week had passed since I'd seen the shadow dissolve and found the first charm near the forest's edge. I hadn't told Elise. What could I say? That I'd seen something inexplicable, that the forest felt alive, its gaze a constant pressure? She'd laugh, call me overtired, her pragmatism a shield against my growing fear. Yet the unease clung, a shadow of its own, deepening with each moment I spent near the forest. One morning, as I repaired the garden fence, my hands raw from prying out rusty nails, I noticed Maeve, a villager who often cycled past with a basket of bread and preserves. Her bright smile and quick wave were a rare warmth in the village's reserve, a reminder of human connection. But my attention snagged on another charm, identical to the first. Hanging from a branch near the road, its twigs and dried flower swaying in still air, deliberate, as if meant to be seen. I set my tools down, approached, and stared, my fingers itching to touch it, a mix of curiosity and dread urging me forward. Finally, I yanked it free, tossing it into the undergrowth, the act leaving a hollow dread that pulsed in my chest, as if I'd disturbed something sacred. Days later, Elise noted Maeve's absence over dinner, her fork pausing mid-air. "She hasn't come by with her bread," she said, her brow furrowed. "It's not like her to miss a delivery." I nodded, silent, my mind spiraling to the charm, the shadow, the forest's unrelenting presence. That night, the cottage felt colder, the fire's embers casting flickering shadows across the kitchen walls, their dance unsettling, as if mimicking something alive. I stayed up, nursing a cup of tea long gone cold, staring into the dying flames, my thoughts circling Maeve's disappearance, the charm's weight, and the forest's pull. I must have dozed, because a sound, a high-pitched, piercing scream, jolted me awake, cutting through the silence like a blade. It was distant but desperate, echoing into a stillness heavier than before. I shot upright, heart pounding, straining for another sound. It came again, sharper, more anguished, then stopped, leaving the silence to rush back, oppressive and absolute. "Elise!" I called, my voice hoarse, stumbling to the kitchen window, throwing it open with trembling hands. Cold air rushed in, biting against my skin, the moon's pale light casting long shadows across the road and the forest beyond. I leaned out, scanning for movement, for any sign of the scream's source, but the forest was still, its darkness impenetrable, giving nothing away. I stayed at the window, gripping the sill until my knuckles ached, my breath shallow, my eyes searching the shadows. The scream didn't come again, but its echo lingered, sharp and real, refusing to be dismissed as a dream. Finally, I closed the window, the latch cold against my fingers, and returned to bed, Elise undisturbed, her breathing steady. I lay awake, the scream looping in my mind, its desperation a warning I couldn't ignore. Dawn brought no relief, the gray light creeping through the curtains only deepening my exhaustion. I hadn't slept, the scream's echo a relentless companion. As I sat in the kitchen, nursing cold coffee, a sharp knock startled me, the sound cutting through the cottage's quiet like a gunshot. Elise, wiping down counters, raised an eyebrow, her humming faltering. I moved to the door, my hand hesitating on the knob, and opened it to find two men on the porch. Sergeant Doyle, tall and weathered, his face lined with years of grim duty, and Officer Keene, younger, his sharp features guarded, his eyes scanning me with practiced neutrality. "Morning," Doyle said, his voice low and even, carrying the weight of authority. "I'm Sergeant Doyle, this is Officer Keene, local constabulary. There's been a report of a missing person, Maeve O'Connor. You familiar with her?" Elise appeared at my side, concern flashing across her face. "Maeve? She's missing." He nodded, his notepad poised. "Hasn't been seen for a few days. Her family's worried. She often came through here, we're told." I hesitated, Maeve's bright smile vivid in my memory, the charm's weight heavy, the scream's echo clawing at my thoughts. "She hasn't been by," I said carefully, my voice steady despite the turmoil. Not since a few days ago on her bike, waving as she passed. Doyle's sharp eyes studied me, as if searching for a crack in my composure. Notice anything unusual lately? Anything out of the ordinary? The scream rang in my ears, sharp and desperate, but I couldn't bring myself to speak it. The words caught in my throat. My fingers tightened on the doorframe. No, I lied. The word a stone in my chest. Nothing unusual. Doyle held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded, tipping his hat. If you think of anything, let us know. Keen added, she might have left town for a bit. Happens sometimes. Elise frowned. Without telling anyone? That's not like Maeve. They tipped their hats again and left, their boots crunching on the gravel path. Elise's worry lingered, her eyes searching mine, but I avoided her gaze, the lie a barrier between us. That night, the unease followed me to bed, a shadow that refused to lift. Elise fell asleep quickly, her breathing soft and steady, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the silence growing heavier with each passing minute. Sleep came eventually, but it was no refuge. The dream began with a sound, a melody, faint and haunting, drifting through darkness. Its notes sharp and mournful, played on an instrument I couldn't name. I followed, my steps slow, hesitant, the ground beneath me soft and damp, yielding underfoot like flesh. The forest rose around me, its trees impossibly tall, their branches weaving a canopy that blocked the sky, plunging the world into shadow. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of moss, decay, and something sharper, like blood. The melody grew louder, more insistent, drawing me deeper into the darkness, my feet moving as if compelled. A circle of stones and glowing mushrooms appeared, their light soft and otherworldly, casting shifting shadows across the ground. At its center, a figure danced, its movements fluid, hypnotic, its form blurring. Human one moment, something else the next, its limbs stretching, twisting, its face a smear of shadow and light. The melody swelled, wrapping around me like a net, pulling me to the circle's edge. The figure stopped, turning, its features twisting into something incomprehensible, a void of hunger and malice. I woke, chest heaving, my skin damp with sweat, the melody lingering, sharp and haunting, refusing to fade. Days later, Maeve's disappearance and the dream's melody haunted me, a constant undercurrent to my waking hours. Elise left for the village to buy supplies, her absence leaving the cottage quieter, the silence a mirror to my growing dread. I turned to the crumbling stone wall at the property's edge, a task I'd avoided, needing the distraction of physical labor. The morning was gray, the air damp, the cold seeping into my bones. I pulled on gloves, the leather stiff, and grabbed tools from the shed, the metal cold against my palms. The wall stones were slick with moisture, mottled with lichen, some loose from years of neglect. I pried one free, the scrape of stone against stone sharp in the stillness, the earth beneath dark and compact, tangled with weed roots. I worked methodically, the rhythm steadying my nerves, until my fingers brushed something unnatural. A charm, identical to the others, nestled in a crevice between two stones. Twigs bound with string, a dried flower at its center, its presence jarring, as if it had been waiting for me. The air grew heavier, colder, the charm's crude design filling me with dread. It didn't belong here, the wall untouched for years, yet there it was, deliberate, mocking. I stood, tools clattering to the ground, my breath shallow, visible in the cold air. The pattern was undeniable. The charms, Maeve's disappearance, the scream, the shadow, they were connected, threads of a larger, unseen web. I needed answers not just for Maeve, but for the dread that had taken root in me. I walked to Annan and Bridget's cottage, a stone house at the village's edge, its thatched roof curling smoke into the gray sky. Annan answered my hesitant knock, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as he took me in, his weathered face unreadable. "Ethan," he said, his voice low, measured. "What brings you here?" I cleared my throat, gripping the charm in my pocket. I need to talk. It's about the cottage, the forest. His gaze lingered. Then he nodded, stepping aside. Inside, the warmth was immediate, the scent of baking bread mingling with herbs. Bridget, knitting by the hearth, looked up, her gentle face tightening with concern. "Ethan, is everything all right?" I pulled the charm from my pocket, holding it out, its rough edges digging into my palm. "I've been finding these around the cottage, in the forest, the wall I was repairing. They're all the same." "What are they?" Annan's gaze darkened, his jaw tightening. "They're wards," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "Protection, or meant to be." "Protection from what?" I pressed, my voice sharper, urgency breaking through. Bridget's knitting stilled, her hands trembling as she exchanged a glance with Annan. "From what's in the forest?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. Annan sat across from me, his eyes fixed on the charm. "The forest is old, older than the village, older than anything we know. Something lives there, something that doesn't take kindly to being disturbed. The wards are meant to keep it at bay, to stop it crossing into our world, but they're not foolproof." My voice trembled, the weight of his words pressing against me. "The previous owners, Killian and Anya, what happened to them?" Annan's expression grew grim, his voice low, almost reluctant. "Anya vanished first, went into the forest one day and never came back. Killian was consumed, thought the wards would protect him. He placed them everywhere, cottage, garden, walls. One night, he went into the forest, no one knows why. Came back covered in mud, went to bed. Next morning, he was dead." Bridget's hands shook, her knitting forgotten. "The wards didn't save him." Annan's warning was firm, his eyes boring into mine. "Keep them up. Don't disturb them, whatever you do." I left, the charm a lead weight in my pocket, Annan's words a chain around my heart. Twilight fell as I returned, the forest's presence thicker, its shadows creeping across the road. Panic drove me to replace the charms I'd removed, my hands raw as I wedged them into the wall. The tree line, the undergrowth, the cold biting through my sweater. The air grew colder, the melody faint but persistent, threading through the silence like a lure. Elise returned, oblivious, holding a basket of juniper berries for preserves, her humming a stark contrast to the dread consuming me. I couldn't tell her. Not yet, not when the words felt like madness. That night, sleep brought the dream again, sharper, more vivid. The melody pulled me through the forest, the ground pulsing, the air thick with decay. The glowing circle of stones and mushrooms appeared, and Elise stood at its center, her back to me, unnaturally still. I called, but her movements were wrong, jerky, as if puppet by unseen strings. Her head tilted too far, shadows hiding her face. I shouted, the melody discordant, and woke, gasping, my chest heaving. Elise's side of the bed was empty. A note on the bedside table read, "Gone to visit the neighbors, back soon." But the handwriting was too perfect, not hers. I checked beneath the bed. The ward I'd placed after Annan's warning was gone. The space empty, a faint imprint its only trace. Panic surged, the air colder, heavier, as if the forest had seeped inside. I grabbed a lantern, its flames sputtering to life, casting a weak glow that did little to pierce the darkness. My hands shook as I stuffed the remaining wards into my pocket, their rough edges scratching my skin. The front door creaked as I stepped into the night, the cold air sharp, the forest's darkness swallowing the road. The melody returned, faint but relentless, pulling me forward, my boots sinking into the damp earth as I crossed into the forest. The trees closed in, their trunks slick, their roots pulsing underfoot, curling like fingers. The air grew heavier, thick with moss and decay, the melody growing louder, more insistent. The forest felt alive, its whispers brushing my ears. Words I couldn't grasp but whose intent was clear, warning, mocking, luring. The circle glowed ahead, stones and mushrooms shimmering with unnatural light. Elise stood at its center limp, her auburn hair catching the glow, her breathing shallow, her arms hanging as if unbound. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, its limbs too long, its form shifting, blurring, impossible to fix in my vision. Its movements were fluid, unnatural. Its presence tied to the forest's hunger, a predator that fed on disturbance, using the wards as both shield and bait. I had removed them and it had taken a lease. I stepped closer, the air crushing, the melody warning me back. My hand dove into my pocket, pulling out the charms, their fragility my only weapon. I placed the first at the circle's edge, the twigs digging into my palm, the air rippling as it hit the ground. The figure twisted, its form writhing, the melody faltering. I moved quickly, placing each charm around the circle, their presence disrupting the glow, the notes breaking like shattered glass. The figure lashed out, its shadowy limbs reaching, but the charms held, forcing it back. With the final charm, the circle erupted in a cacophony of sound, the forest roaring, trees shaking violently. The figure dissolved, its form swallowed by the shadows, the glow fading until silence reigned. Elise collapsed, pale but alive, her chest rising with shallow breaths. I dropped the lantern, its flame extinguishing, and gathered her into my arms, her weight a fragile anchor. The forest was still, its oppressive presence gone, but the unease lingered, a scar on my soul. I carried her out, dawn's faint light breaking through the canopy, the cottage's weathered walls a stark contrast to the darkness. I laid Elise on the bed, her breathing steady but weak, and packed what we could carry. Clothes, photos, essentials. By sunrise, we were in the car, the engine rumbling as I turned onto the road, the forest fading in the rearview mirror. I gripped the wheel, a vow etched in my mind. We would never return.